For the last talk, we're going to switch gears a bit again, back to the NIH, but to a different NIH thing, which are the small business research grant model. And one question about this that arises. First, I need to say that because I'm a member of the Hematology Examination Committee for the American Board of Internal Medicine, every time I give a talk, I have to state the material presented is not derived from and does not reflect the activities of that committee, as if this particular talk would have any connection whatsoever. But I signed on, and gotta follow the rules, just like you have to read the directions. So why would you be interested in SBIR, STTR type grants? One is there is a progressing entrepreneurial aspect to medical research. So just think about how many times a week do you get an email or a LinkedIn message from some doctor who has started a company? It seems like I get one every day. I'm currently reading Man's Fourth Best Hospital, which is a sequel to the formerly controversial and popular novel House of God, and I'm mostly reading it because I really can't believe it just keeps getting worse every page. And I'm sure it's got to get better at some point, but so far not yet. But one of the big themes is doctors getting entrepreneurial and starting research companies. What's another reason for this? Well, some of it has to do with the political and governance environment of medical schools and universities in general. How many of you have at your institution an incubator for companies and such? Raise your hands. Yeah, basically everybody. And I think it's something you kind of. I think it's like on job descriptions for deans and presidents. Now, have you got an incubator? I was visiting some places, and one incubator. They have a building, and one incubator appears to be using most of its building to rent out to Chick-fil-A for storage, because Chick-fil-A is right next door. But in any event, everybody has to have one. As university boards of trustees become progressively more and more dominated by people from business and political backgrounds, they tend to think about things like revenue streams from patents and things like that. And to regard a medical school as not as traditional. Well, we're training doctors, we're doing care, we're advancing medical knowledge. No, we're an economic engine for the region. There is one medical school that I won't name, I've never worked there, that's not real new, but it's not that old either. And when it was established, the governor of that state said at the open, when he cut the ribbon on the first day, that the main purpose of the medical school, in his view, was not to train doctors, to advance knowledge, to improve the health of the region. It was to be an economic engine by generating patents and technology companies and things like that. And this is a progressive theme. So these are becoming more and more attractive. My perspective on these is gathered from more than 10 years of service on the various special emphasis panels, including a couple of stints a couple of years as chair, and seems like a lot more time as a vice chair of these committees. The legal thing that established these grant programs is a law called America's Seed Fund. So that's how Congress looked at it. They are the Small Business Innovation Research Grants and the Small Business Technology Transfer Research Grants. They're administered by the NIH. They are limited to medicine and the life sciences. The institutes and funding agencies that have at least $100 million, but less than $1 billion in extramural research fundings, are required to have an SBIR program. If you have more than $1 billion, you have to have an STTR program, which is bigger, gives bigger grants. The objective of the research proposal, and this is different from the hypothesis-driven research that we've been hearing about before is that the objective is a product rather than knowledge per se. Now, knowledge is good, and but again, it's a product. It's a gadget, it's a drug, it's something. And they both require the existence of an applicant company to develop and apply the product. So you can't, as a faculty member, go back to the lab or the office and type one of these things out and send it in. You have to organize a company. And exactly what your role is different. So what are the critical differences between these things? A lot of them relate to structure and PI and level of funding. So if you have an SBIR, which are smaller and more common, the PI must be at least a 0.5 FTE employee of the company. It has to be actually greater than 0.5 FTE. For this reason, these are grants where frequently the business person is the PI and not the science driver. Not the science driver is not necessarily the PI. The proposal can be a joint effort between the company and a nonprofit research institution, which may be a university, maybe a foundation. Usually it's a university. And if you're doing a phase 1, it has to be a third. If you're doing a phase 2, it has to be 50%, and I'll explain what the phases are in a minute. But usually the company then contracts with the nonprofit for resources and space. So it isn't like somebody starts a company and then goes and builds a building and outfits a lab and says, now I'm going to apply for a grant. What they do is they start a company and they have a post office box and they have a desk in the garage or in the basement if you live in an area of the country with basements, or somewhere, or you rent part-time in an office condo, and you strike a deal with the university that they will lease you some space, not unlike VA nonprofit corporations, although these are actually for-profit corporations. For the STTR, it has to be a joint venture. You can have one that is purely from a company and doesn't have a university or nonprofit component, but I can't remember seeing one. I've never reviewed one. The STTR must be a joint, I take that, maybe one. The STTR, it must be a joint venture between a company and a nonprofit, and the company has to provide at least 40% of the effort, and the nonprofit has to provide at least 30, and the other 30 you can split out as you work out. The difference is the PI can be an employee of the university or of the nonprofit foundation rather than being an employee of the company. So for the STTRs, it may be that the science person is the actual PI. So again, sometimes happens with others too. So what are the phases? And the different phase gets you different amounts of money, and it's a different grant number. So if you have phase 1, it's up to 150,000. If you have phase 2, it's up to 2 million, and it's spread out over 2 years. The phase 1s are 1-year grants. The direct phase 2 is something where you get to skip phase 1. To get a standard phase 2, you have to have completed a phase 1. Makes sense. You can get a direct phase 2 if the feasibility, which is the main emphasis of phase 1, has already been demonstrated. So you can apply as a direct phase 2, and you have a little higher bar in your proposal that you have to demonstrate that the proposal is feasible. You have to show this is why this proposal is feasible, not as with a phase 1 where you would say, I'm going to do these things to show that the proposal is feasible. And basically, you get like phase 2 level of funding. And then there is a fast track phase 1, phase 2, where there is a critical need and where you can demonstrate where you'll be able to perform some work to demonstrate, to confirm feasibility, but you already have previous work that makes the feasibility very, very likely. You just need to do a couple things to pin it down. It's really a lot like a direct phase 2. The objectives of the phases are, as I kind of alluded earlier, phase 1 is technical merit. and feasibility and commercial potential. So it has to be possible. It has to be possible for you as the applicant, and it has to be something that's got a commercial potential. One of the big challenges as scientists look at these grants is understanding the difference between doing something because it's intellectually significant or because it's going to enhance our standing of pathophysiology to something that's going to make something that can be sold. And that's one of the challenges you see as a reviewer, that people sometimes don't quite grasp that. And frankly, it's one of the challenges to the reviewers, because a lot of the reviewers are the same people who are reviewing R01s and merit reviews, where the approach is very different. Phase 2 is where you carry the work of phase 1 over to the point of commercialization, and you have to present a detailed commercialization plan. We'll talk a little bit about what that is later. And phase 3 is commercialization, and you're on your own. The NIH doesn't pay for that. You have to get money from investors. But your commercialization plan is going to say, this is how we're going to get money from investors, and these things usually have letters from various venture capitalists who are head of companies that have funny names, that like spell things and this kind of stuff. And they say, well, this is a great idea, and I am going to give $2 million you give them $2 million if they do X. So we've already heard about the scored criteria that contribute to the overall impact. They're the same words for the criteria, but they mean something different in these projects. So what's difference? Significance. It's not just going to be scientific significance or just clinical significance, although that is important. You know, if it's a disease that only 2 people in the world have been reported to have, unless you think those 2 people have a lot of money and are going to buy a lot of this stuff, you're kind of sunk. So the first question in significance is going to be, get back to the microphone, is there a market? What unmet need will this product meet, or need that is being met that this product will meet more fully or meet better, if you like? For phase 2, you will need the commercialization plan, and the purpose of the commercialization plan is to analyze the market, to look at what are the competing products, why is your product going to be better, what are your intellectual property rights for it, if you don't have like patents pinned down, what is your plan to pin down patents about it? And you need things like letters from potential investigators, sources of future funding that will let you carry it to commercialization if you have a successful completion of phase 2. For the investigators, a lot of the investigator thing is going to be, standard scientific investigators. Have you collaborated? Are you well qualified? What's your background? But in many cases, there will be people on these grants who have what a lot of us would think of as rather thin CVs in terms of publications and grants, because that's not what they've been doing. So you will have, for example, people on there whose experience is business. They will be, unlike most scientific grants, there will be key personnel without doctorates. They'll mostly have MBAs. So say this fellow was the president of such and such a startup company. This fellow was a senior executive in the intellectual property division of Pharma Grande, something like that. And you may have scientific people who will not have a lot of publications outside their period of training, but what they will say is, I was, with X drug company where I was the lead scientist on gorilla growth factor or what have you. So that's the kind of, those are different features than you would see in investigators. Innovation carries a lot of weight. in this project. Perhaps maybe a little more than sometimes in the hypothesis-driven thing. And innovation is going to be, how is this better than what's in the market? Does it represent a changing paradigm for the product? It could represent not just a changing intellectual paradigm of understanding the disease, although it could be, how does it take a new intellectual paradigm and apply it in some commercial way? The approach, again, like Dr. Wood said, the approach is what's going to sink you if you don't do it right. Phase 1 is very, very focused on the milestones that get you to phase 2, which, phase 1, how are you going to demonstrate the feasibility, your ability to pull this off and make a commercial product, which you will then talk about how to move it to the stage of taking it to market in phase 2. Phase 2 is very focused on getting you to that commercializable product. An important point that is critical to people who write a successful application, again, is also a problem for the investigators who are writing it sometimes, because they frequently come from a traditional academic background, is that mechanistic investigation only matters to the extent that it impacts the feasibility and the market competitiveness. So, you will see a grant, and there will be an aim there'll be, one aim is, I'm going to, make this gadget. Number 2, I'm going to make it smaller. Number 3, I'm going to demonstrate that this small gadget works as well as the big prototype. Number 4, I'm going to demonstrate the mechanism by which the process works. Well, number 4 shouldn't really be in there. And the environment is going to be things like, do you have the equipment you need? Do you have the support? But whereas in most cases, what you're giving in your environment thing is somewhat of the intellectual environment, and that's important too. But a lot of it is, I have a centrifuge that's this big, and I have a centrifuge that's this big, and I have 4 confocal microscopes, and one's for left-handed people, and one's for right-handed people, and all these things, and I have a drive-in cold room and all this stuff. In these grants, you can actually get, although all these things are important, if you can actually get by if you have a letter from the university that says, or the foundation, or even from an investor that says that if they get this grant, I will give them access to my drive-in cold room, the big centrifuge, the little centrifuge, the centrifuge that's just right, all these things. Now, so those are differences that you need to think about in the criteria by which they're scored. Second, the review panel is going to be different. These are reviewed by special emphasis panels rather than study sections. Now, in theory, special emphasis panels are kind of assembled, for each round. You don't get a letter saying you are appointed to the special emphasis panel and you will be serving on it for X years and this kind of thing. You get a letter every X number of months that says, hi, can you be on the special emphasis panel to review these projects? Now, a lot of the same people in any particular area, there will be a lot of the same people on the special emphasis panel, because they will continue, and frequently you'll be reviewing a resubmission of something you reviewed last time. But again, it's a little bit of a less stable group, but it's more stable than you would think of, kind of an ad hoc panel. A lot of special emphasis panels are sort of ad hoc. This is not quite ad hoc, but it'll have ad hoc members. It is mostly, or at least a plurality, of kind of traditional academic physician scientists, but there will be significant numbers of career scientists from industry. There will be a lot of people who started out in academics and have moved to industry, and there will be people who are scientific consultants to industry. So there'll be people who have an industry. There'll be a significant chunk of people who have an industry perspective, and somewhat differently from a lot of the reviews, there will frequently be a smattering of PhD engineers, usually from universities, who are aware of biological manufacturing issues, robotics, and various techniques. So, in the case of, an important point that's been made by the previous speakers has been that you need to write, at a Scientific American level, recognizing that not everyone is going to be an expert in your field. And one of my old bosses used to say that you should write grants as if they're going to be reviewed by people who are infinitely intelligent and utterly ignorant. And in this case, not sure about, I suppose they're infinitely intelligent, but you'll actually have some people who are not utterly ignorant about some aspect of the project in different aspects. So there may be a reviewer who will be an expert on the topic, maybe a couple may be experts on the topic, but one of them may be an engineering person who is an expert on the methodology that you're going to apply. One of them may be a scientific consultant whose specialty is kind of intellectual property recognition, who will comment on whether your likelihood of being able to get a clear title to this technology is clear. But again, the biggest difference is the perspective. And because, again, the goal is to make a product that meets a need, and it's usually a drug or a device. Occasionally it's technology, but usually it's either a drug or a gadget. Mechanistic studies are important for the rationale, and you have to have your rationale, your premise, in order to establish it. But this isn't where you would fund mechanistic studies. You would not say, I'm going to demonstrate that this process works in a certain way, and then, having demonstrated it works in a certain way, excuse me, I'm going to then demonstrate. I'm going to then take it and commercialize that. You have to. That's, you're already. That's one step back from this. It is hard to get applicants sometimes to do this. It is hard sometimes to get reviewers to understand this. And when we review these, and some of them we get reviewed in person, my personal experience is that more of them tend to get reviewed in these sort of blog type review meetings, or sometimes in a webinar format. But that is frequently a topic of discussion, that someone will say, well, they don't demonstrate their mechanism, and then the group will argue through whether that's actually something that this grant should be about. And just the final point is that if you are proposing to do something that meets a need, thank you, like to build the famous Better Mousetrap, that's more likely to get funded than proposing something cool about mice, like assessing the mouse microbiome. But if, having assessed the mouse microbiome, you found some microorganism in there that you can put in a stable form, and put it in cheese, and leave it around your house, and it won't bother the kids and it won't bother the dog, but it'll do in the mice, then you might have something that will get funded through this mechanism. So in any event, are there any questions? Are there any questions for the other members? Yes.
I do.
Sure.
So actually,
you're not allowed. You're a speaker. You can't ask questions. No, go ahead. I'm just teasing.
Literally, I just got an email about 30 minutes ago from someone approaching me about putting in an SBIR
Yes.
for probably related to the work I do in medication adherence. They're looking for apps, phone apps,
Yes.
and things like that. What's the advantage for an investigator to do this? Would likely be a situation where you're not the PI. The PI will be the individual from the development company.
Yeah.
Although you could see your things moving forward, but what are some of the pros and cons of doing this?
So typically the pro gets back to the entrepreneurial part of it, that it may frequently people who are, particularly if you're actually a co-investigator is supposed to be a consultant, you will frequently have some kind of equity interest in the company, or your institution may have some kind of equity interest in the company that will potentially generate some revenue for you. They may also, again, it may also, just like with any other consortium or contract arrangement for a grant, it may generate some funds that will support, one of your other activities. So, but a lot of the people in these grants tend to be, part owners of the company. So this is an yes. So this is an opportunity, for to make your fortune. I suspect everybody going in this is thinking, well, it's either going to support my research, or it's going to carry this theory that I've developed further, or it's going to make me I'm going to become it's going to support my lab for the rest of my life, or it's going to support me for the rest of my life, or something like that. It will, you don't want to necessarily be the next Elizabeth Holmes, but that's
the
up to
real challenge
yes.
with that is to interact with your local research establishment, because if they're organized, like a lot of schools are, to venture towards, they have the legal experts to protect the
Yes.
interests
Yes.
of the investigator on the university side.
Yeah.
Plus, they have the business folks to make sure you're not getting ripped off of your contribution. You develop an app and for someone, and you get undervalued in the process. That's just what you're always worried about. They're going to try to get you to do as cheap as possible. And that is we've had a series of, situations where those went off the track. In particular, developing a simulation model for the human body, which is a big project, and where you could basically simulate biochemical functions and stuff like that, and make drugs and other things. It ended up in litigation by all parties. So, you really need some advice when you get into that.
No, and these are you get intellectual property issues tend to get into who owns the intellectual property, are they licensing it from the university, and these are things that tend to come up particularly in phase 2. And but again, these are also activities that universities seem to find intrinsically attractive. They attract people. They attract, in addition to just potentially generating revenue. They also attract people who are interested, who come from a business background and are interested in sort of donating to the university to develop these activities, and can be used to enhance the other sort of non-commercial activities of the university. Purdue University up in Indiana has a department of drug development, and they have a drug development building, which I believe is quite large and very well equipped. It's called like DD1, and they support an academic department, graduate students, faculty, research activities, some of which subsequently leads to some of these projects. So, yes.
How does the Freedom of Information Act apply to these particular projects? Because a lot of times when companies talk to a company or you pursue something with them, you have to sign out everything. You're not going to talk about this outside of this.
There are sections of the grant which are described, which are supposed to be covered under a business confidentiality agreement, and they have to declare what those sections are. So they'll be in some kind of this is this section is covered under business confidentiality. The study section has to see it because it's not. But it would be, those presumably would not be acquirable